Welcome to Sitcom Showdown, a podcast that reviews classic sitcom episodes and inducts them into our very own Hall of Fame. As usual, one of us has chosen a sitcom episode and the other guy has no idea what it's going to be. Will they already know it? Will they love it? Can they be convinced that it's worthy? Let's find out on Sitcom Showdown. Hello dear listener, it's Jeffers here. Just to let you know that this new episode of Sitcom Showdown isn't the one we plan to record and release for you this time around. Due to a bit of a setback with illness, we've actually whipped out an episode that was recorded, at least a year ago now. One that was actually canned. We scrapped it, but we've revived it so that you've got something new to listen to. And we'll be back on schedule in around a fortnight's time. Enjoy.
So, Jeff, what are we inducting into the Hall of Fame this time?
Well, I've gone Australian.
Whoa.
Hey, it was bound to happen sooner or later. Probably later, because the rest of the world has so much to offer. Yes. And Australia, when it comes to sitcoms, much as we love Australia and much as we love sitcoms, they're not highest up the totem pole.
No, it's a shallow pool.
It's a shallow pool. Okay, it's a sitcom that ran for 2 series. It's called Lano and Woodley.
Oh, okay.
Who, as we just mentioned, are Australian. And so they're a comedy stand-up duo, but they managed to wheedle a sitcom out of the ABC. And I did ask you if you knew about Lano and Woodley, but I'm going to just go ahead and assume that your reaction might be like if I interviewed 50 people in the street, have you heard of Lano and Woodley? I wouldn't expect any more than maybe 4 to say yes.
Well, yes, I've seen some of their sketch stuff.
Right.
But that's about it. I've not seen this before.
Okay, so what happens in this sitcom is that essentially Colin and Frank are best mates and they live together, but they sort of, think of The Odd Couple, I suppose, but not necessarily. They sort of lurch from job to job and situation to situation due to their tendency to get into scrapes and to screw up really badly. And this is often because Frank's he's not stupid, but he is very childish, very naive, and likes to muck about. And Colin, who's the responsible one, keeps getting sucked into this tendency to muck about against his better judgment.
Oh, yeah.
And so they keep getting fired quite a lot.
So they go on jobs together.
Yeah. So
it's a bit like the Goodies.
Oh, I can't believe you just said that. That's fantastically excellent, because my literal next comment in the notes here is parallels to the Goodies. There's quite a few. They use their real names in the sitcom, and that's very, very rare. Jerry Seinfeld did it in Jerry Seinfeld, but those other characters weren't real. Whereas much like the Goodies with Graham, Tim and Bill, you've got Frank and Colin here using their real names. They also sing the theme tune, which is something the Goodies always did. It's very insular, so quite often it's only those two in the flat, or they might venture out into the real world and interact with some people, but there's no other sort of regular characters.
They're just trying to save money by
it could be
not making new names up and doing their own theme song.
Yep, it's probably all very.
Did they direct
frugal.
it themselves as well?
No, you're totally nailing it here today, because my next comment was about direction. And Bob Spears, who directed the Goodies, of course. So they brought him out to Australia to direct some of these. No.
What?
So there you go. You've just picked all this, and we haven't even watched the episode yet. Extremely well done, Steve.
Bizarre.
ABC Australia 2 series, 1997 and 1999. Well, cast. This is going to be a real quick one. It'll allow us to save time, because Colin Lane... The only other thing I've seen him on TV, he'll have a guest spot here and there on other Australian shows, but he's been on QI at least 3 times. And for me, that's good enough for anybody. If they can say on their CV, I've been on QI 3+ times, they're doing pretty well.
I'm completely ignorant on the subject of QI. Is that a UK show or an Australian show? I don't even know.
I don't even know how to respond to
people.
This, Steve. I'd be switching off right now if I wasn't sitting here listening to it in reality live. My goodness.
I'm just trying to be honest.
I'll lecture you after this show. But QI was hosted by Stephen Fry, and it's been going for umpteen seasons, and it's the ultimate general knowledge panel show.
That makes sense in the context of your comment.
Well, yes and no.
If he made it all the way to QI in the UK.
Yes, that's right. Well, these two won, I can't remember the exact award, but it was a Perrier Award or an Edinburgh Fringe Award.
An Edinburgh thing.
Where they were the best new comedy act or something along those lines back in the day.
There you go.
And Frank Woodley, well, he went on to do another sitcom called Woodley, which I have strong feelings about, and they're very negative feelings. And we'll say no more, because I don't want to waste time on it.
Do you get some water if you win a bottle of water if you win the Perrier Award?
Yep. In the form of a trophy. I'm trying to create a gag between the Dundies and the...
Yeah, no.
I went blank there for a moment. So if I was to ask you whether you've watched this before, I'm guessing that's a resounding no, or if you have, you can't remember.
No. No.
Fair enough. Okay, so getting back to your point about these guys being like the goodies, there are more parallels than that. Whereas the goodies and, to a lesser extent, the Mighty Boosh could be insanely surreal. If you dial back the most surreal moments of the goodies, say about 30%, that's where you'll end up with Lano and Woodley. And the other thing is, they're very polarizing. If you like them, then you're set. And if you don't, you're going to hate it, because either their sort of humour or what they do is going to rub you up the wrong way, then you are not going to enjoy any of this. And you could say, yeah, they're an acquired taste. But how much are you going to sit through before you start coming around to it? Yeah. But the payoff is if you do develop them as an acquired taste, then you'll really, really like it. I'll talk more about that later on as we get through it, depending on what your reactions are. Anyway, this is called The Primal Warrior. Let's toddle off now and watch it, and then we'll find out what you say.
Okay.
Got the feeling, got a bit of an inkling. This is gonna be one of those days. This is a show all about me.
And me.
And all the things I do and all the things I see.
And also what I see.
I got the feeling, got a bit of an inkling. As long as we're together, it'll be okay. You stunted human being. You and your childish pranks. If you hadn't have talked me into doing that stupid trick with the lift, we'd still have a job.
Well, look on the bright side. We don't have to go to work anymore. We can just muck around all day.
Muck around? Well, who's going to pay the bills? Who's going to pay the rent?
You'll think of something.
I'll think of something. Frank, I think it's time that you actually took some responsibility for your own life. I'm not going to be around forever to look after you.
What do you mean?
Well, tomorrow, I could get hit by a bus.
You're right. It's true. You could be killed. You could be killed and I'd be all alone. I'd be all alone.
Just calm down, just calm down. I'm just trying to make a point. I probably won't be.
Oh, good. I won't worry about it then.
I got the feeling, got a bit of an inkling. As long as we're together, it'll be okay.
All right, we're back from watching The Primal Warrior by Lano and Woodley, an Australian sitcom from the late 90s. And I think I could be in trouble here, Steve. When you're watching something on your own, and a whole bunch of... You'll have your own reactions, and then sometimes when you're with someone else, it can alter the perception you have of the show. And I didn't hear a single laugh from you, which wasn't good. And I was looking at it, and but we'll get into it.
Yep. I'm interested to hear why you think it's 5-star.
Okay. Well...
maybe you can talk me around.
No, I don't think I will be able to, but as we've had in off-air discussions before, when you're picking from Australian sitcoms, with the exception of a few, Mother and Son being a prime example and other things, then you're picking from a pool of shows and episodes that are not up there with the best of the international ones. But this is more it goes back to what I was saying earlier about if you don't like the Lano and Woodley humour, you're not going to like it.
When you said that if you don't get their humour, is this the same as their
and this is
stand-up act? Or?
Yeah, this is where part of the problem comes from, is that obviously being stagey, you've got to project and you've got to push it right to the back row, and you've got to be big because you've got the whole stage to do. And so the thing with Frank, the childish character, his movements are massive, and he's bouncing around all over the place. And then when you translate that to a small set, the way he does everything in an exaggerated way, when you blend that with the childish humour, because it is a lot of kid humour, and it occupies this ground, and we'll actually get onto a synopsis of the episode in a minute, but like there's this childlike humour, but they're dealing with a real-life adult situation, and it suffers, possibly, from straddling both worlds in a really undefined way. And that's another way it can be like The Goodies, in that it can do this incredibly simplistic, obvious stuff. That type of humour mixed with more adult sort of humour. And I think that with this show, they don't know which side of the fence they're on, and they're sort of trying to straddle these two worlds, and it doesn't always come off.
Yeah, well, we can come back to that. I've got some ideas about that, but maybe we can come back to that.
All right, well, I'll tell everyone what's happening here.
We'll tell everyone what's happening first.
Okay, so in a nutshell, the boys have just lost themselves another job because Frank talked Colin into pulling a bit of a prank at this job. They've got watering plants in an office building. And, the first 2.5 minutes of this doesn't have any dialogue. And that's the sort of physical humour you're dealing with. There's a lot of slapstick in it. So unlike some sitcoms, which is all sharp dialogue and witty lines and all this sort of stuff, this is more about physical comedy and prop comedy. Anyway, so they're watering these two plants, and they're in a sort of mini foyer where there's a lift, and people are looking at them, and they go into the lift and they go off to the next floor. So the boys grab the plants, run up the stairs and set up exactly the way they were on the first floor, but they're now on the second floor. And when the people come out of the elevator, they see these two guys still watering the plants, and they think the elevator's gone wrong and they've opened up the doors again on the first floor, with the joke being, of course, that they're on the second floor, and Frank and Colin have completely fooled them. And that's actually a really clever gag, and it opens up pre-credit sequence, and when you realise what's going on, you go, oh, yes, that's actually quite amusing. If you did that to someone in real life, you'd think you'd got them a beauty.
Yeah, the music was very Goodies-ish. In that bit, it was like a bit of the bang, guitar and all that sort of thing. I mean, the thing that comes to my mind is, how did they know that these people even wanted to get out on the second floor? Is it a 2-story building, or I guess you just can't ask those questions. But
no, you can't really, can you?
It's like Al Bundy not paying off the $12 at the end of the.
Oh, yeah, very true.
Episode.
You don't want to ruin that because it's such a good gag. Yeah, if they'd all gone to the third floor, I think statistically. What do you reckon? 3 people get in an elevator. One of them's got to be getting off at the next floor, surely.
I guess so. Oh. Right, I'll suspend my disbelief.
Okay, good. Right. So that's the pre-credit sequence, and then you've got the credit sequence. And then you open the beginning of the episode. And even then they don't get into the dialogue. You've got this whole bathroom scene where Frank is torturing Colin by turning off the hot water while Colin's in the shower. And then he does a little symphony of screaming and all that sort of stuff. And that goes on for probably another little while.
Is he turning off the hot water, or is he turning on the cold water?
He's turning on the cold water, sucking the cold water out of the system and burning the hell out of Colin. Hence the screams and all the steam.
Sorry.
What happened there? I don't know.
What happened there? The only reason I'm saying this is because this happens at our house all the time. Right, you flush you're in the ensuite, someone flushes the toilet, which uses the cold water. The shower goes hot.
Yeah. So Frank's using the cold water to, put the water on his toothbrush.
Yeah.
And then torturing Colin, who's in the shower.
Yeah.
So they engineered this whole scene out of that.
Yeah.
And then, obviously Frank's having fun. Every time he turns the tap, Colin's going, ah! And he creates a symphony of screaming until eventually Colin's stepped out of the shower, put his robe on, still going, ah, every time, and sneaks up behind him.
Oh, that was amusing.
So the upshot of all this is that basically the boys have got fired again, and Colin's just sick and tired of this constant pattern of he'll go out and get them a job, then Frank will do something absolutely stupid or con him into also doing something stupid, they'll get fired. And he's just saying to Frank, not everything's a game, because he's trying to have a conversation with him, and Frank's just doing all these childish things. And he's saying, right, what happens if I get hit by a bus tomorrow? then you'd be on your own, and then what would happen? And then Frank sort of goes, "Oh my God, I'd be on my own. What would I do?" And he says, "Well, you've got to grow up. You've got to become a man. You've got to be responsible for your own life." And that's the beginning of the plot. So Frank finds an ad in a newspaper, which is a massive big prop gag, very goodies-ish, saying that he can attend a masculinity workshop for a whole weekend, and it's only $1,000. But, of course, they haven't got the money for that. So Colin just says, "Well, that's a good idea, but I'll run you a workshop here in the flat. You don't have to go anywhere. I'll do it for you this weekend for only a fraction of the cost." With that fraction being 999 1,000th.
It's a screaming bargain.
And so obviously for the rest of the episode, there's no more sort of plot points. It's all just, vignettes of here's these activities that Colin's trying to run to make Frank into a man. And we'll find out if by the end of the episode any of that actually works. And so that allows them to go from sketch bit to sketch bit to sketch bit. Not all separately, but just these little activities of things they do to try and eke humour out of it.
Are they taking the mickey out of these?
They totally are. Yeah, masculinity workshops and getting back to nature, putting on animal skins and mud and going out and hunting things on weekends and doing meditation and doing all those sorts of things. He's totally taking the mickey out of the emerging masculinity and men's movement sort of thing back in the 90s.
Yeah, so this is kind of like high
observational comedy. Mixed with the childishness of kids' entertainment. Here's Humphrey level fat cat entertainment.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely right. And that's what I was getting to before. So to refer back to my notes, the 5 things that I thought were really, really good and what make it a brilliant episode of Australian comedy. Now, I do have written here, crap joke, drop the wood sequence, awful bad wordplay. What did you think of that whole sequence with the dropping the wood and that?
The only bit I liked was when they start chasing each other around, throwing lumps of wood at each other.
Right.
Because it got into bottom-esque territory.
Yeah. That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that before.
When they started getting violent, I thought, it's looking up. Unfortunately, you never hit Frank in the head with a bit of wood.
No. Oh, yeah, but, Frank did get shot with an arrow. Colin didn't get hit in the head with a lump of wood, no. But he did get hit with a fridge.
Yeah.
So that's all right. But see, this is what they're trying to do. So you've got, we talked about the physical comedy, right? With Frank jumping around like a lunatic and they're doing those things. Then you've got this, as you said, high observational comedy. And it was pretty well observed when Colin is acting as the camp leader.
Yeah.
And doing all those things. And then you've got the prop comedy with the big newspaper and the Autumn Leaves book. All this. So they're mixing all these very different types of comedy together. But I'll go through my list.
Okay.
The reason I really liked some of these jokes is because the way they seeded it. So at the very beginning of the episode, in the bathroom scene, Frank's brushing his teeth and mucking about. And, of course, when Colin says, come on, we'll go look for a job, and slaps him on the back, he ends up swallowing the toothbrush. And that disappears for the whole episode. But then at the end, when the violence starts to happen, he coughs the toothbrush back up, and you've totally forgotten about it. And it's just like Billy Connolly. And what he does is at the start of his stand-up, he'll do a gag, and then he'll wander off, and then he'll eventually come back to that gag. And you go, ah! Yeah. So they've done that now. They've done that 3 times in this episode.
What are the other ones then?
So there was the Autumn Leaves album. So at the beginning of the workshop, Frank's explaining his hobby about how he collects all these autumn leaves and puts them in the pages of this massive book, which is the size of about 3 atlases stacked on top of each other.
Yep, I thought that was very manly.
Is this because you collect autumn leaves?
No.
No?
It seemed... Maybe it's getting back to nature. It's part of that.
Back to nature, it's part of that thing. And so you've got the autumn leaves at the start, and then at the very end, as we'll find out, Colin is trying to shoot an apple off Frank's head as a test of Frank's courage, and he goes, I'm going to shoot this arrow through the apple on your head. And he basically just shoots an arrow straight into his chest.
Yep.
And it's revealed that Frank had his Autumn Leaves book in his pocket, which helped protect him from the arrow, which, as we're speaking about it, unless you've seen it, isn't funny. But when you realise this book is about a foot thick by 2 feet tall and a couple of feet wide, and he couldn't fit that in his jacket, but he manages somehow with some trickery to pull it out of his pocket.
Yeah, I mean, the sight gags there were probably 3 or 4 sight gags. I just couldn't tell how they were doing this stuff. That was one of them.
Yeah.
It was very smoothly done.
And Colin being hit by the bus at the end, I've watched that endless times. I still don't know how they've actually done that. Because the shadows are there and he's there on the floor and there's a bus parked over him and yet somehow... Wow, anyway.
Well, he was probably standing...
They would have cut a hole in the front of the bus.
Well, he was standing to one side and the bus comes through the front of the shot, but not on the same alignment as where he's standing. Or...
Yeah, well, it doesn't work. Yeah, I've looked for that. Anyway, we digress. And so the other one is the trick jump off the sofa. So towards the beginning of the episode when Frank's being absolutely stupid and he wants to do all this jumping around on the sofa and Colin says, right, I'm going to jump off the back of the couch onto the cushions, do a double somersault and end up on the floor in the splits. And of course, totally ends up electrocuting himself and failing. But then by the end of the episode, without even meaning to, as he's trying to avoid being hit in the head, he jumps off the back of the sofa, does a double somersault, and ends up on the floor in the splits.
I didn't even realise that.
So they seeded that throughout the whole... And these are 3 examples of exactly the same thing. The toothbrush, the autumn leaves, and the trick jump, which were all set up, 20 minutes before.
Did you notice that the first time you watched it, or is that something you picked up?
Oh, well, I was trying to pick some Australian comedy for the show, and so I was watching it with a more structural eye. And as I was watching it with a structural eye, I started to realise what they were doing. But it had one of the post-punchline punchlines, and Collins landed on the floor in the splits, which is insane to start with. But then he has the presence of mind, after shocking himself, he can't believe what he's just done, to raise his arms up in the gymnastics V. And that just made me laugh so much the first time I saw it. It's just a classic. So that's 3 examples of the same sort of seeding they do of these physical gags throughout the whole thing. And by the end of the episode, when they pay off, you've forgotten about them, which was what makes them so great. Then there's the potted palms gag we were talking about at the beginning, which is great. The panpipes, when they're playing their little campfire song.
Oh, goodness.
Now, that's not the
funny
funny
bit.
This
was good.
Okay. So, yeah, some of that was great, but he's using his fingers and pretending they're panpipes and going, ooh, ooh, ooh. Yeah, that sort of thing, which in and of itself is funny for the first 5 seconds, but then they play a whole song that way, and you're going, oh. But then he pulls the peace signs and goes, ooh, 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 ooh. That's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. Because it's the added punchline again. So it's over, the joke's over, they've done the whole panpipes thing, and he's pulling the peace signs like a proper old hippie around the campfire, so that's all in context. But then they add the extra gag on top, where he takes those 2 fingers of the peace signs and blows into them, like, when a Western person has shot their gun and they blow the smoke off their gun, if you see what I mean. And so he's gone, anyway, you have to get it, Steve.
I understand it now, but
yeah,
it's like some of it's so unsubtle, it's ridiculous.
It really is children's television level Teletubbies sort of gear.
What child is going to get that?
But this is what I mean about it straddling 2 worlds, and you don't really know where it sits. It's a tricky one.
And
it's
what was the song
one.
they were playing on the panpipes?
Danny Boy.
Oh, yeah,
there's a story behind that.
Well, the gag was that
Frank
would just start playing
it.
something. Yeah, they're going to improvise something. Frank, just start playing something, and I'll make something up.
Yeah,
and they come up with Danny Boy.
Mm-hmm. So the story behind the scenes is that they wanted to use other things, but of course they didn't want to pay copyright or royalties on any of these things, so they had to pick a song that was out of copyright and they wouldn't owe anybody, and Danny Boy is one of those, being a traditional. So they settled on Danny Boy.
Well, yeah, plus, I guess part of the gag is
that it's not improvised.
It's, one of the best known songs. It would be like doing Old Lang Syne or something like that.
Yeah, it's either going to tickle your fancy or it's not. Now, this next joke, we've had our observational comedy, we've had prop comedy, we've had physical comedy and slapstick. Now they get into wordplay. Now, before we had this whole, because Frank's name is Frank Woodley, and don't drop the wood while he's holding the campfire wood, and that whole horrendous sequence about the dropping of the wood. That's wordplay that's failed. But then when he goes, this has been a fantastic weekend, Frank. It was great to go back and thinking about when we each chose our spirit animal. And mine was the wolf. What was yours? And Frank says, the anaconda. Hang on, don't you mean anaconda? And he says, not just anaconda, the anaconda. That's the funniest joke of all time. That's got to be top 3 of it. Any joke ever written in the history of the world.
Oh my goodness!
Oh, that's up there with Reach for the Skylar from South Park. That's that.
But they also did this one where he comes in and says, "Frankly."
Yeah, but that's just terrible.
And like, yeah,
that was awful. But come on, the anaconda. The anaconda. Oh, say. The anaconda gag's like an ultra highlight. Anyway, what did you think of Colin playing the camp coordinator and the camp leader, talking to the whole group of men, even though there was only 2 of them in there? Let's go around the circle.
Yeah, well, that was...
What do you want to do that?
That was funny, but I couldn't help thinking it'd be better if they had like a neighbour who was a hippie that was into this stuff that they could have had come in and basically run these guys through it.
I suppose then you wouldn't have got the conflict, would you? The conflict at the end.
Which conflict? Oh, where they punch each other.
Yeah, because it'd be those 2 against him rather than those 2 against each other. But yeah, so I've got those moments which for me, as I was watching it on my own, seemed brilliantly excellent. And I'll stand by the Autumn Leaf album, the splits off the back of the couch and the toothbrush, which were all set up at the beginning so you get, as I've said before, double your bang for your buck. Then you've got the anaconda, which I still think is fantastic.
I'm obviously just in that 50% of the population that doesn't get it.
Yeah, and the panpipes, peace sign, pistol blowouts, they're really good as well. And, of course, the potted palm stunt at the start.
It just seemed too long to me. Is this half an hour?
Yeah.
Seemed like taking it down to 22 minutes or something like that would have been good, because the hand slapping thing, and I know they paid off the hand slapping towards the end, where they're having this fight. They break out of a proper fight and they start doing hand slapping, but there's this extended hand slapping scene towards the start, and it goes on for about 3 or 4 minutes. You know,
it does, and that was hot on the heels of the whole "don't drop the wood" gag, right? So you've got probably a good 70 seconds spent on the "don't drop the wood" gag, then followed by the hand slapping thing. So you could have cut a clean 5 minutes out of that episode and totally eliminated the 2 worst bits, and it would have been an absolute cracker.
Yeah.
And, you know, they didn't do that, and it's very hit and miss and very stagey.
Do you need tension in a sitcom episode?
Yeah, there's a difference between tension and bickering. And there's a lot of bickering going on, but not necessarily tension. Or did you think it's the other way around, that there was tension?
Well, no, I don't think there was. You had this thing at the start where they obviously get fired. So that kind of sets up the thing where they want to improve Frank so that this doesn't happen again. But then you immediately go into this thing where Cole goes completely, after giving him this stern lecture about, you've got to get it together. You've got to stop being childish and da-da-da-da-da. You've got to, what happens if I'm not here? You've got to stand on your own 2 feet. Gives him this massive lecture. And then 2 minutes later, he's giving him a 2-day stupid discover yourself retreat.
Yeah.
And I don't know,
because he can't help himself. Because
he's sucked in, he's sucked into the
gets
stupidity.
Sucked into the stupidity vortex, exactly. And he ends up doing hand slapping competitions and setting and doing a campfire inside the apartment.
I think, it could have been something like at the end of the week, there was say instead of getting fired, they got their last warning at the job or something like that.
Right.
Which prompts the big lecture, and they've got until
Monday to
get themselves sorted out. And then they go into through the weekend
time limit
doing this stuff, but then they've got to show up for work on Monday and
have everything
convince the boss.
Yeah.
That this has been successful, and of course then it falls apart.
So external pressure. Yeah.
Or does it seem like all the Although I like the bits with the neighbours, which we haven't mentioned, because they, when Cole gets electrocuted, power goes out to the entire apartment complex, and then you see a scene of there's the
supervisor,
handyman or the supervisor. He's kind of explaining what's happened to the residents. He's saying, did anyone do anything that could have caused this?
Electrical
and,
surge.
You pan around and everyone's like going, no, they're all in their curlers and all this sort of stuff.
Their gym jams.
Dragged out of their apartment in a hurry. And you pan around and they're all shaking their head. And of course you get to Lano and Woodley and they're shaking their head, but they've got their hair standing straight up on end. And then the same thing when they set fire to when the fire sprinklers go off.
Yeah.
It's the same thing again.
Was anyone doing anything in your apartments that could have set the sprinklers off? I don't know what happened. No. It wasn't me.
One
and
of the neighbours
they're standing there.
One of the neighbours complains that it's ruined her
leather couch.
And then the following day, that gets paid off when you see a bunch of guys bringing her couch out and putting it in the skip bin.
And her fridge.
Yeah.
The skip bin that Colin gets thrown in by Frank out the window.
That was well done. I don't know how they did the bit where Cole's getting hung out the window. Frank starts swinging him towards the skip bin.
It must have been braces down Frank's sleeves, then covered up by his exposed forearms, then running down into the legs of Colin. But it was well done, however they did it.
Yeah, I didn't get it. But yeah, it was well
Mm.
done. Oh, I don't know, Jeff.
Look, we've got to have a first where it doesn't go in.
Yeah.
Crikey blimey.
Well, no, I think if you nominate it.
Well, this is I remember thinking when we did Corner Gas for the first third, and I couldn't figure out what was going on, and then I realised it was the no laugh track thing. And then that's really unnatural for me, but then I trust Steve's judgment, and I've actually since watched that episode again when I was pulling clips for it.
Okay.
And I go, oh yes, I'm starting to see it now. But as I've spent most of this episode almost in I'm pre-apologising for a lot of the stuff.
No, you shouldn't do that.
And trying to explain what's going on. So I know where it stands with Lano and Woodley. So yeah, I just thought, right, after having watched it and seeing the evidence of that seeding, and as you just pointed out, it didn't even occur to me what you just pointed out about the leather couch and the fridge going into the skip. So there's all these things that have been laid in beforehand that are then paying off at the end.
Mm. There's probably more going on than you notice immediately in terms of things being set up and paid off and stuff like that. But, yeah. Yeah,
either you get what Frank does or you don't. And even I watch it and think, oh, did they have to do that? It doesn't necessarily work. But see, my stance is I forgive all of those things, Steve, when you get the Aconda joke. Oh, yes, indeed. And the autumn leaf. It's those moments of magic, they just totally stick out, and you think that's just pure genius.
I think the funnier joke was when they've had a tiff, and Frank says, right, that's it, I'm going out, I'm going to collect some leaves for my album. Cole says, yeah, well, good luck with that.
It better be a bloody long walk.
Yeah, because it's not autumn, it's spring.
So I saw some positives in this, and the highs are very, very high for me personally. I understand there are some lows. So I'm taking this first Australian offering and putting it out there.
Thanks for that, Jeff.
Oh, no worries.
My turn to choose something that you hate next time.
Well, there you go. They can't all be winners, can they?
Nah. See you, everyone.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Join us next time on Sitcom Showdown when we'll be putting another 5-star episode under the microscope. And in the meantime, you can contact us with feedback on Facebook, Twitter @Sitcom Showdown, or by email sitcomshowdown@gmail.com.